Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this seminar, both of those in the audience here in the room and also for those joining online this afternoon. My name is Lars Otternes. I'm a research fellow at IDS, and I have the pleasure to chair this seminar this afternoon. The seminar is based on the Anticipate project, which is focusing on co-located hazards, uncertainties, and preparedness in India. And as it happens, this is actually the first and also the last seminar of the project. The project started amidst COVID lockdowns in 2020. Most of the work was happening during and briefly, shortly after the pandemic. And it actually happens to finish at the end of this month. The project officially finishes. But of course, the issues that the project is working on and raising is very topical, and the conversation that will start this afternoon will continue after this seminar, for sure. So we have a panel here who will share some of the emerging findings from the project. So we'll have short introductions from each, followed by Q&A. And I'll introduce all the speakers in a minute. But also just to say that after the seminar, we finish at 3 p.m. But after the seminar, there will be, for those in the room, there will be an opportunity to look at the exhibition that's in the room, photos from the project, images from the project, and also coffee and cake. So if you're nearby, if you happen to be online, if you're nearby, hiding in your office, etc., and you're within walking distance, that's your incentive to also join us in the room. So for the speakers, we then have, in order of speaking, we have Shilpi Srivastava, who's the PI, and who's been the steady captain leading us through the choppy waters during the project. Then we have Krishna Achyuta Rao, who's a professor at IIT Delhi, who unfortunately couldn't join in person, but have a recorded video message that he will present. Then we have Megha Sheth in the room, a research officer on the project. Vinita Bachina, who's also a research officer on the project. We have Shibaji Bose, who's a visual methods consultant, who will present from the very innovative part of the project. We have Tom Ainsworth, who's a subject lead of architecture and design at the University of Brighton. And last but not least, we have Mihir Bhatt, director of the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute in Ahmedabad. So without further ado, I'll just then hand over to the first speaker, Shilpi Srivastava. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lars Otto, for the introduction, and welcome everybody, those joining us online as well as in the room. It's a great pleasure and a sense of relief to be here at this stage in the project, given a lot of unanticipated things that happened during the timeline of the project. The day the project started, most of the world went into lockdown. And for nearly 2 years, fieldwork was impossible on the project because of a series of waves that were occurring across the world. And like we had 2021, the Delta wave in India. So we have braced a lot of uncertainties to get to this point in the project. And we're very happy to have our team from India here to be able to join us despite all the challenges with visa and immigration. And today what we're going to present is really what we found so far in terms of working in the field for over 2 years. The project was supported by the British Academy, and I'm very grateful for that funding. They've been extremely helpful and very flexible because the project went into a series of extensions. And as Lars Otto just mentioned, we have the institutional collaborators right there and the team members who belong to those institutions in front of you. So the project, what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to set the scene for the project. What was the overarching rationale? What did we start with? And then once all of my team members have presented, we are going to bring it all together. So what are our major findings and how are we speaking to some of the broader debates out there? So the ideation of the project is firmly located in the rapid rise of extreme weather events across the world. These events also make it amply clear that we are now entering a phase of what we call radical climatic uncertainty, where the past may no longer be a good guide to the future. For example, the challenge of extreme rainfall in historically drought-prone areas, which we also see in our field site, which is historically drought-prone, but now is facing the challenge of droughts and desertification. But it is just not merely the challenge of limited historical precedent. For instance, an event occurring in a location which has not been seen in the past. So the unknown, but also the highly variable nature of known events, which is becoming more and more extreme in their incidence, scale, and impact that adds to this complexity and uncertainty. So one example of that would be the heat wave that swept across South Asia in the March of 2022. It was the warmest March in 122 years. We do have heat waves in tropical countries, and especially in South Asia, so it's not an unknown per se, but the incidence of it in March was like an unknown, so the highly variable nature. And we don't seem to see a pattern repeating from year after year. So it's not a risk, it's an uncertainty, because what we observe in March of 2022, we may not observe in March of 2023. And my colleagues will speak about that variability in a minute. What we're also witnessing is a co-occurrence of multiple extremes, which are increasingly becoming co-located by way of being closely timed, such as droughts followed by floods, or co-occurring, for example, droughts co-occurring with heat waves or wildfires in other contexts. This is what we have called co-located hazards in this project. These demonstrate a break from the past in terms of changes in frequency, intensity, impact, and scale. So there is a movement from risk, what we could predict, towards uncertainty where we cannot predict, so the unknowns. In Anticipate project, our objective was to examine how different actors are actually forecasting and preparing for some of these co-located hazards and what these mean on the ground. So a variety of climate science literature has talked about compound extremes, for instance. That's the term that they use. But there's very limited work on compound extremes from the social science perspective. So our project contributes to that understanding of climate extremes from below. How are people experiencing these extremes? What do they mean on the ground? And what is extreme on the ground? So we sought to reimagine forecasting and preparedness in the light of these co-located hazards with marginal communities in Western India, mainly with pastoralists and small-scale farmers. So our focus really was on the state of Gujarat, which you see here on the map of India, which is one of the most drought-prone states in the country and has experienced erratic patterns of rainfall and severe droughts over the years. And uncertainty that several people are attuned to. So I mean, in terms of droughts and water scarcity. However, floods, which were usually seen as black swan events in this region, maybe 2 decades ago, are now increasingly becoming the norm. So floods are occurring almost every year in different parts of the state. While local people may be attuned to coping with climate variability, the rapid rise of extreme weather events and high climatic variability is challenging responses and practices of anticipation. These then intersect with wider forces in the political economy, which could be land use changes, which could be industrial development, as well as land and water grabs, which also limit adaptive capacity, the capacity to prepare and also adapt to these extremes. In Anticipate in particular, we are looking at the intersection of hydrological extremes. So here it would be droughts and floods with some of these wider forces in a particular site in a village in North Gujarat. The name has been anonymized, so we will just say village in North Gujarat. We've drawn on a range of methods from the social sciences, design and visual research, and atmospheric modeling. These are the 3 key streams or work packages, so as to speak, in the project, and they don't sit in silos. So it was a highly integrated project. And in a way, and this is how the project is arranged right now, the conceptualization of the framework that guided the project came towards the end because it was a grounded approach. We started with a premise. Okay. So in a way, we followed a very grounded and integrated approach. We started with the premise. The opening point was what we know from climate sciences, but our conceptualization of co-location arrives at the end of the project. And that is what we're going to share today. Also, because of the challenges that Lars Otto has spoken of, and I have also mentioned, our methodological approach was very adaptive because we hit a lot of roadblocks during the process of our fieldwork, and Shibaji in particular will talk about some of those. So this will become clearer as we go along with our presentation, where we've constantly reframed and framed our questions, and working with the community has also challenged some of our assumptions as social scientists and also as researchers. So now I will hand over to Krishna, who has recorded a presentation for us. So Krishna is the lead for the climate science work package. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here. So what we're going to do is, for those in the room, we play the video here. For those online, the link is being shared. And if you could just watch the video at your own pace, because it's difficult to stream it online, as I understand, via Zoom. And then we will return to the room in 10 minutes. So we're going to play the video here in the room now.
Hello, good morning. This is Krishna Achyutarao. I'm recording my presentation for the final workshop of the Anticipate project. So if I look at the total rainfall, which is above the 95th percentile, this is the West Coast, and you can see this is along the Western Ghats, where the highest amount of rainfall, as also parts of the Northeast, are recorded in India. Now, Gujarat as a whole, and certainly our area of interest, gets much less rainfall through the monsoon season. But if you look at the trend in this rainfall, you can see clearly along the Western Ghats and into Gujarat, there's a strong increasing trend, up to 5-6 millimeters per year increase in the total rainfall above the 95th percentile. Completely the opposite thing appears to be happening on the northeastern side. So this is our eastern box side, and this is our western box. So there's a significant increase in the extreme rainfall clearly occurring over Gujarat. And the converse, if you look at the consecutive dry days that have occurred over the season, this is an indicator of whether the drought lengths or the period of no rainfall is increasing. And you can see here that our part of Gujarat and further up into Rajasthan are typically places where you have really long dry spells, even during the monsoon season, right? So 30-40 days of no rain is fairly common in these regions. But what we see occurring is that there is a decreasing trend in that in these dry spells. So you have fewer days, consecutive days, that are dry. So both of these, the total amount of rainfall and this consecutive dry days, are both telling us that the tendency is towards more rainfall and more extreme rainfall. So these have these have been influenced or by the typical modes of variability that we experience on what we call the interannual time scale. So it is 2 to 5 years time frame. And one such is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, where you have the warm phase, that is the El Nino, or the cold phase, La Nina. So without going into all of the gory details, if you look at what we call a composite picture of this extreme rainfall, during El Nino years, you tend to have much lower extreme precipitation. Whereas during the cold phase or the La Nina phase, you have much greater probability or much greater amounts of rainfall occurring. And the consecutive dry days picture is consistent with that. When you have an El Nino, you have an increase in the number of consecutive dry days. When you have a La Nina, you have a decrease in the number of consecutive dry days. So we've just come out of the El Nino phase. So this year, for example, is we're just transitioning out of El Nino into perhaps a La Nina phase. So this year's monsoon could either still carry the effect of an El Nino and therefore have less than normal extreme rainfall, or because we are transitioning perhaps into a La Nina, it's still too early to tell whether we're going to end up with a wetter and more extreme rainfall season. So these are things that our data has been able to show. The other thing that, as you can see in this picture here, where you've had a region of high extreme rainfall, and it tends to have shifted into Gujarat, where you now have high extremes, and you have this region where you have less than normal amounts of, or a decreasing trend in the extreme rainfall. These tend to occur for reasons. This is not purely by chance. And one of the things we have been investigating is what part of how we are affecting climate change is driving these changes, right? So we looked at both this extreme rainfall measure, that is total rainfall above the 95th percentile, and the consecutive dry day measures. If you look at greenhouse gases and how they've increased, then the models tell us that you are going to increase this extreme rainfall, right? On the other hand, if you just increase the sort of air pollution that we are also good at doing, at least here in India, this is going to decrease this extreme rainfall. So these two things are co-emitted. The greenhouse gases and the aerosols are all emitted together, yet they have completely opposite signatures on what they do to this extreme rainfall. So if I were to look at the combined effect of all that, then it kind of looks really washed out, because these are kind of counteracting each other. So this is something that we are working with to try and understand, that is this something that the models are capable of predicting into the future, and also whether our understanding of the processes can tell us whether this increase in rainfall and extreme rainfall over the Gujarat region is something that is going to intensify with climate change driven by greenhouse gases, as this figure indicates, or whether it is going to decrease as the aerosols. And just to hammer home the point, greenhouse gases tend to have an effect of decreasing the consecutive dry days, whereas aerosols tend to increase the consecutive dry days. So this is still work in progress. We are trying to understand what are driving changes into this region, so that when we look at a forecast or look at a long-range projection of climate change, we understand what is causing that. And it's not just, oh, this is what the model says, because our understanding of the process can go a long way into reducing the uncertainties. If the models don't have the right processes, then clearly we can discount them, or at least give them less weightage. With that, I will stop, and unfortunately, I'm not there to take questions, but certainly I hope that if there are questions, Shilpi and others can pass them along to me. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Shilpi. Thank you, Krishna, for this interesting presentation. So we have seen like how scientific models are narrating the change in hydrological patterns in the region, like consecutive dry days are decreasing and precipitation is increasing. I have done field work on the field for like last 2 years, and I'll be working how the community at the village level are seeing these hydrological changes. So it's basically it's not about the hydrological extremes that are floods and drought. Community at the local level are transitioning between from extreme droughts to extreme floods, because as of now they are seeing floods as one of the kind events, and they also observes droughts are also there. But in between, as Shilpi also mentioned, there are emerging extremes that they are facing in very frequent time, in very nearby intervals, as they are experiencing intense heat wave during March of 2022 and again in May of 2023. Also, there are extreme precipitations during a particular time frame, like within July, August, and early September's. And at the community level, they are not, the extreme precipitation is not allowing them to cultivate their crops. So, and also in the May or March, there are like in May 2023 or in March 2023, there are incidents of hailstorms. And also there are unseasonal rains occurring throughout the year in the winter and summer. So these are the emerging co-locations that are facing by the communities at the local level. So it's not about the hydrological extremes, rather it's about the ecological drivers that are emerging at the field level. We have not seen any pattern so far in these from the ground level, like variabilities are happening in various period of time during the year. But there are considerable series of extremes one after another. The new emerging phenomena at the local level they are experiencing is a green drought. They call it Lilo Dukar in the local language. It's the condition when they cannot cultivate during monsoon. So these are the region where they traditionally do the rain-fed agriculture, but now during the monsoon they cannot cultivate. Because there is extreme rains, the land use pattern has changed with all these years. And now with the waterlogging during the monsoon, they cannot cultivate. So these kind of phenomena is emerging at the grassroots level. However, the community sees this incident as a very positive manner because they can cultivate during winter crops and summer crop season with availability of water. So this is the transitioning period for them, and they are facing very wet days at the field level, at the local level. Also, while preparing against these uncertainties, local community face that dairy, like animal husbandry, and agriculture as a shock observer. Like they have relation at the mandi, which is agriculture crop market, where farmers sell their agricultural crops. So at the mandi, there is a network of buyers and sellers. And in such extreme time, or when their crops are failed, uh, the loans are advanced to them, and it is a work at the preparedness for the community level and also at the animal husbandry level. So farmers are or animal husbandries or livestock keepers get the liquid cash income through the dairy farming, dairy operation. So this cash income, this loan advancement, and other informal structures are in a way helping community as a preparedness. So this is it from my presentation. Thank you for listening to me. Over to you, Vineet.
Okay, thank you so much, Megha. So what I wanted to talk about, and is something that came through in Megha's fieldwork, is the significance of the Narmada Canal in this area, and it is of great significance to people in this area, and I'll talk about that for a few minutes and how the canal can act as a site of preparedness. So the Sardar Sarovar project, or it's also called as the Narmada project, is a large-scale hydropower project in the state. It's widely considered to be the lifeline of this drought-prone state and supposed to be the key to water and food security, and more recently, climate adaptation. So the dam was initially largely built to deal with the droughts that this area has been facing historically. But now we see that people are dealing with floods and compounding extremes and more consecutive days of dryness, as we saw in the previous presentations. And so in this particular area, or our study site, the canal is very significant for the community. There are tensions around water access. We observe some agrarian soil changes because of some access to water, and also flood impacts that I'll talk about in the next few slides. So the overarching question here is, how does the dam contribute to preparedness with increasing extreme weather events, where the past is no longer a very good indication for what's to come in the future? So in terms of contributions to preparedness, the first thing is that the canal provides a bit of a buffer in periods of some shorter periods of extreme heat or dryness. The community feels like such periods are a bit more manageable when they have access to water. This also means that their perceptions of scarcity have changed a lot as well. They consider drought to be consecutive seasons and years of scarcity, dryness, starvation almost, but monsoon deficits or shorter days of dryness, they find have become a lot more manageable with access to this water. Flood preparedness, however, has become a bit more complex. Flood is something that the community views as a very difficult climate extreme to deal with because of very immediate impacts. And in 2017, we see that water was released from a nearby dam, which was the Dantewada Dam. And a lot of that water caused canal walls near this village to breach, causing very large-scale damage, loss of homes, crop, cattle. Another issue here is what is being termed as more human-made disasters. And this is something that has come up in recent times because of inefficient dam management. This is causing preparedness to become very challenging for communities because dam opening and closing schedules have become quite erratic, which means that water isn't being released as and when it should, and we're waiting for dams to get a lot fuller than they should be before they release water. So some of these flooding events could be prevented possibly with more planning. I'll conclude with some thoughts and some more observations from the field, which is, yes, the access to water has helped with preparedness, but this also depends on who is able to access the water. The dominant narrative surrounding the canal is hopeful, and it's looked at as a savior for communities that have been deprived of a steady source of water for a very long time. And this is true in some cases, but there are some limitations. Socioeconomic hierarchies are widening the gap, not only between beneficiaries of water versus those who don't, but also between those who own land and those who don't own land, because they're forced to depend on larger landholders and borewell owners. We're also noticing a lot of agrarian changes. Farmers are able to make the decision to do double and triple cropping. We're seeing they're noticing changes to soil quality, increase in salinity, waterlogging, and green drought as well. Flood preparedness, like I mentioned, has become complex. It needs to go beyond just household preparedness, and it requires rethinking of dam operations institutionally. Unplanned dam management, like I said, has led to certain preventable flooding events that should be avoided entirely. And I'll conclude with kind of thinking about future climate adaptation. The dam now is helping with drought adaptation. It is helping people tide over sort of smaller periods of dryness, and it is providing a buffer. But if we are seeing that this area is getting wetter and wetter as time passes, how is that going to look like in the future with climate change? I'll stop there and hand over to Shibaji.
So we will be reflecting on using the visual methods in this project. So as we all know that visual tools for surfacing tacit and subjugated knowledge are increasingly used in various research queries on climate extremes. Now this short presentation attempts to understand and reflect on why and how the visual methods were selected in Anticipate to co-produce and to unpack multidimensional evolving themes across a wide variety of spaces within the research study area, ranging from hidden to visible, but not always fully understood. So we used a mixture of deliberately employed visual tools, such as embedded photography, such as photo voice, and such as photo elicitation. So we'll come later, but through the process, we reflected these visual methods in addition to providing the reflections of the participants, which all participatory visual methods claim to do. We also fused it with the reflections of the researcher and their relationship with the camera. and also compared and contrasted how villagers respond to uncertainty in their own contexts through different layers, like photo voice through the eyes of the community. Research had taken visuals, which Megha, through her ethnographic research over 2 years, mixed with them and then understood them. And through the process, took pictures, what they found to be important. So, and also lastly, but most importantly, have the community to elicit their reflections, perceptions over the photos which she has taken. So, as I said, we are using a combined lens of the researcher and the community. Now, the methods tried to touch all the intersections, and what emerged through this engagement over time, through this verbal participatory conversation, which is now hybrid knowledge. And we used a variety of crosscuts, intersections like caste, like identity, race, gender, age. And in a lot of cases, we found that the lack of uniformity in the reflections, even within a given context of a small village, in this case, a study area, this mirrored the difference in contextual experiences of individuals from the groups, depending on their vantage points in daily life. So just to detail out the process in a few words. So first, we had this notion that we will do a photo voice, which is about giving camera to the participants and telling them what they found to be important in their daily lives through their own, the way they see it, their worldview, their perceptions. So we started with photo voice, and this is Megha having the orientation with the women. And so the entry point was the women in the village, as we didn't have an NGO or anybody else who were, helping us. So it was a very virgin field, so to say, and we had to go in. So she hang around with the women, and of course, because of this, we wanted to start with the women. And so we formed a group of women through, there are different castes, etc. And then it was what, 6 months after the social science research has started, the ethnography has started. And then we realized that they were very motivated. There are a couple of things that one needs to keep in mind while using visual methods, like the smartphones are always the men of the family. And the women, even if they have phones, they are the old phones in which they cannot take pictures, number one. Secondly is, and what we actually found out, and when we thought that this process may not be working, they actually are very enthusiastic, but they didn't simply have the time. It's not only it's not only about what their daily existence, but also the preparedness and what the social science has thrown up. That was also an extra burden to prepare. So then we moved to something called a guided photo voice and to a photo elicitation, in which they actually told what they find important. Megha, through her lens and through their lens, took the photographs. And if you see, that is the sheet which we then went on to show to the women, and then they could elicit the responses. But after a while, we not only started it with women, but also went through all the intersections of younger male, elder male, younger female, elder female. So that's why we was saying that it was all, these are some of the, we see it, during the exhibition, and it's all there, the pictures. And these themes were actually something that the community actually themed them. It's not that we put them into themes. So that was also the beauty of it. You see, these are all the pictures that came up. And lots of them, and it will take, I don't have such time, and Lash won't allow us. So the reflections of, yeah. I will just go through the reflection. So from the seasonal tracker, the cropping pattern, we saw that the cropping pattern is in a state of flux. And they could actually, with minute details like the intensity and color of clouds, direction of shadows, trees, eggs even, they could, and how they strategize to deal with uncertainty due to erraticness of the weather. That was one reflection. We got reflections about water and their relationship with it, and then dairy as an alternative livelihood, and then about the market linkage from the issue of storage of the harvest and when to sell, also distress selling. And while, and that's something that we understood when the photo didn't take off, is unpaid and hidden care of the women. But if you go to the mandi, the marketplace, or to village farmers meeting, etc., you don't see women, but the women are the one who do 80% of the labor. So that's what. And then, about forecasting also, and so also about generation gaps and aspirations. So the highlights that came out of this method was, number one, it corresponds with our findings from ethnographic work. Said earlier, the highlights invisible or hidden effects and changes and their adaptive capacity and intersectional perspectives. So we had a male, female, young and old. And lastly, it's about the methodological advancement also. So our reflection was that the photo elicitation enhanced traditional data collection methods by allowing the villagers to express themselves through their chosen images. Now, this also allowed the farmers to think, reflect, and discuss their ideas with the researcher, which we thought proved to be more effective than letting them express their feelings by taking pictures, in this case, the photo voice, which we tried earlier. So these discussions with the researchers brought out their engagements about dealing with uncertainty in extreme settings and everyday variability, and brought out also not only now, but also brought out memories, meanings, and deep emotions about the landscape and their linkages with the fickle market. I will stop there. Thank you so much. I read through the notes.
So my slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of design disciplinary in this project. So first slide that I've got is partly about positionality. I think the majority of the people in the research team, they are working in a kind of an interdisciplinary sense. So people that are working together in other situations. So this is a description of design that I use in different presentations, but I think it's particularly relevant here. So I consider design to be a basic practice concerned with how we conceive of and understand the world around us. And when we're thinking about that in the context of the project and the disciplines that we're working across. So we can see from the climate science, from the social sciences, from Bart's work with photo elicitation, that each disciplinary perspective is identifying fundamentally different characteristics about the environment that we're observing, both on our disciplinary perspectives, but also our chosen points of interest and chosen points of concerns in the project. So from that, we can then consider how we define the challenges and the opportunities that each disciplinary standpoint then kind of identifies different opportunities from the project that is leading to different kinds of insights and different ways of conceiving of how we might conceive of alternative ideas and alternative futures. So it's then how we think about how we apply those insights to create responsible change, and they'll be different in each instance, and how we recognize and consider the consequences of those outcomes. So that would be something that would be more longitudinal, where we can start to think about recommendations that could maybe come from this, that go into these kind of future gazing kinds of ideas, and how reliable they may or may not be. And the variability that's been identified in the project, I think, is significant in that sense of thinking about the consequences of what we're able to offer.
So a significant challenge within this project has been about the complexity. So there are different complex disciplinary identities. There's different complexities in the time. So as Shilpi identified at the beginning, this is a project that is about crisis, and that we were then studying this project about crisis through a crisis, through COVID. And I think we're now getting to the point where we're kind of working with crises as a way to then kind of understand all of these things through our own experiences and, kind of relating those experiences to the project. So a further kind of complexity that Shivaji's mentioned is within all of those complexities are the challenges of participation. So certainly participation from the community. So there was a similar experience with the elements that I had. So there's visuals to the sides with kind of mapping exercises that I'll go into in more detail in a second. But one of these, or a couple of versions of these, were taken to the communities. And that presented a real challenge in how people are able to engage with these materials, because there's a disciplinary literacy that comes with these, and working with a community that people haven't worked with before proved to be particularly challenging, because it was very difficult for the community to recognize what it was that was being presented to them and how they're expected to respond, and how we can then try to capture kind of meaningful information. So there's a real challenge there. But then we've also experienced that within the research team about each of our respective specializations and how we relate with each other. So there's a kind of a disciplinary challenge where we're kind of pushing the boundaries of who's collaborating with who, just in terms of how do we then participate and create meaningful dialogues with each other. Because certainly when you bring new disciplines together in the first instance, there's a lot of just trying to understand what it is that one another does, which is why I kind of initiated this with an introduction to how I'm conceiving of design. So the final slide from me. So this is an example of a mapping exercise that we're in the early stages of developing. This is capturing some of the early insights. So the kind of little dots are from the village that was the center of this research, that is identifying the different castes, different groups that were there. It's also identifying the bore wells and water sources that the village relies on. The next circle identifies some of the climatic data. So Krishna earlier has given a quick summary of some of those. And then through the outer rings are where we as a project team have started to then map in other insights from our respective strands. So the images for those that are in person, there's one of those that has early drafts of those insights being mapped onto this. So part of the aim of this is to collate and present information from across the disciplinary lenses to enable cross-examination. So the way that they've been presented here is kind of one disciplinary perspective after another in that kind of linear fashion. So this is an attempt to try to compress them into a single image that hopefully increases the comprehensibility of each of our respective strands, but also kind of invites further scrutiny across them, so we can really kind of sense check the insights and see if things that are coming from one specialization tally with what's coming from another. So it's a form of triangulation and hopefully developing more reliable insights through the project. So this approach hopefully will then lend itself to that kind of rapid sense checking of future hypotheses, because we could then add those into these existing maps that capture the insights we've gathered to date, to then start to speculate as to how reliable or unreliable future hypotheses may be. So I'll wrap up at that point and hand back to you. Okay. Great.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Megha, Vinita, Shivaji as well. So far what you've heard is really different disciplinary perspectives and how we approach co-location from different vantage points. So Megha and Vinita's work is really grounded in the site itself. Shivaji added the visual element and the challenges therein in understanding co-location. And Tom's presentation is really about bringing all these disciplinary perspectives together in what we're calling knowledge cartographies, which is basically about different knowledges, how do we study co-location, and how do we bring them together, and what does it tell us about co-location, which was the central premise of the project. So as I said before when I started, our starting premise was we went into the field thinking floods in a drought-prone area is an alarming thing. It's an extreme, and it must be really impossible. But what you've heard from Megha is that, yes, it is a one-off event. Yes, it's getting wetter. But what is really challenging these communities is the day-to-day variability, which is now turning into volatility. So what do we learn about co-location from here? And this is where I'm going to sum up some of the findings from our project. So we see co-location as an axis of multiple interactions, not just ecological interactions in terms of drought and floods, but also spatial, temporal, and social co-locations, which create all sorts of dislocations in the field, leading to migration patterns, for instance, instances of landlessness, etc. So co-location is an axis of multiple interactions and dislocations. The other bit that I think is an important finding from the project is to look at these co-located hazards and instances of co-location, not from the lens of risk, which we've done so far, but from a lens of radical uncertainty. The reason for that is, and as Megha and Vinita's presentation showed, that we are not seeing an emerging pattern. So we don't know what is to come. In March 2022, when we started fieldwork, we were caught by surprise in the field because we were in the middle of a heat wave, and some of us had heat stroke while doing fieldwork. We returned to study heat wave in March of 2023, and there was hailstorm. And then again, you have March of 2024, and it's another pattern. So what we're seeing now that there is no pattern. It's chaotic, it's volatile. And how do you prepare amidst such volatility? That's the question the project has asked. And therefore, one of the conceptual points that the project is making is that risk is no longer a framework within which we can operate because we don't know. We need to operate within a framework of uncertainty and think about preparedness in that context. We've got some lessons from our field in terms of what would that look like. So it could be, we have seen examples of communities' agency, what they are doing at present to just get by, but that is coping. That is not even adaptation because this is really an emerging phenomena. We have witnessed gaps in institutional preparedness. So Vinita talked about the whole challenges with dam and infrastructure. We've seen good examples of networks of reliability in the form of dairy, as well as in the form of the mandi, the agricultural market, where we've tracked these informal networks, which are actually absorbing shocks and stressors for people, and there is a lot of relational interaction going on. Overall, from the project, we've learned the lesson of embracing plurality when we are confronted with uncertainty. And by plurality here, I mean just not integration of knowledge. It is really recognizing that there are plural frames out there, which is what Tom's work is showing. And it's not about bringing them all together, but understanding the challenges of scale and seeing the situation from different lenses. So understanding co-location from different lenses and embracing methodological plurality as well in that process. So preparedness in the context of radical uncertainty may not just be about prediction. It is about generating reliability, having adaptive systems, and also facilitating improvisation, because that's badly needed in an age where we can't predict or we can't work in a risk-based framework. So now I'm going to hand over to Mihir, who is going to provide some quick insights about what should be the future directions of research.
My name is Mihir, and I work with All India Disaster Mitigation Institute in Gujarat in India. And I've had a great pleasure to work with IDS and this particular project, Anticipate. And it has been absolutely personal gain in terms of what we have been able to find out from this project, that that we have implemented. It has been difficult, but equally exciting. And from my experience, I'd like to share some areas where this project has some areas that it has covered and some areas where the project could go. So that's the two parts. In terms of co-location, this project has, as you must have seen, 3 parts: co-location, preparedness, and methods. The co-location, the project has been, if you separate co and location, the co part has opened up a whole series of ideas, further work in terms of co-creation of cos, but contestations in terms of cooperations, collaborations, and conflicts. Nothing new to our civilization anymore. So that's something this very clearly I see coming up in further research and studies that will come up. Habiba, that's what I was thinking. In terms of location, it is very clear that not only in situation or site or spot as a location, a geographic location, but very soon we'll be talking about location in terms of where does co-location within the sciences, within various subjects, within various economies, formal, informal, and within various markets, labor and water. So how this particular hazard is co-located beyond geographic space. And that's something I see coming up in the future. I also see that co-location, if we put co and location both together, as Shilpi already mentioned, about uncertainty, that there is tremendous uncertainty about co-location itself, and partly because it is evolving. Co-location is not something which has happened for a long time, and therefore we know enough about it. And partly it's iterating, as in this particular project, we saw that you have either 3 different hazards happening at the same time, same hazards happening over a period of time, but in the same location. So temporal and spatial iteration. So that's where the co-location are observations, and therefore studies will go further. In terms of preparedness, the project clearly shows further work in terms of preparedness now and preparedness for the future and everything in between. So how preparedness unfolds over a period of time. Second, preparedness for me and preparedness for all. So individual as well as collective preparedness. Also about preparedness at home, domestic level, but at a planetary level. And there is hardly any preparedness we can talk about without planetary view on that. So that's the preparedness part this project opens up for us. This project also opens up for us, I think, in terms of methods and natural science method, social science, if it is separate from nature, and which it is not, then social science methods, visual arts, but visual studies, if that's, and therefore visual science, if, and how all 3 interact and collaborate to help us understand both preparedness and co-location better. It's also about the combination of methods and, trans method approach, interactive approach, a multi-method approach, a diverse method approach, a whole range of method studies, co-location studies can help us live that. So as the chair of IDS says, we are living in difficult times. So for difficult times, this is very difficult answers to that difficult time. I did a very quick and rough, but look at some of the research areas where IDS is very rushing ahead, and some of the work that some of the donors are interested in terms of the future. And I think four or five areas there questions are coming up. One is definitely from UNFCCC and the whole supporting framework of foundations and donors. A question which would be very useful to ask, and it comes from very much Krishna and Shilpi's presentations here, that how co-creations around co-locations happen across variety of natural, visual, social sciences, across sectors, especially livelihood, agriculture, water, and infrastructure, and across peoples such as affected, not affected, but a whole range. And I think that's a question which would be very attractive. To other groups such as UKRI and EU equivalent of that, what would be very useful question, I think, would be from Megha, but your presentation, and that is what can be done to support and nurture future leaderships across both the subject-related leaderships, that is the certain subjects leading, for example, natural science vis-a-vis visual science leading, and across individuals. So that's a second attractive question. The third attractive question would be insurance companies and corporations and World Bank and those kind. And that's a mix of Krishna's and Tom's and Shivaji's presentation. And that is how do we collect and use textual, numerical, visual evidence on co-location for both climate action and climate justice. And that's something we have. And the last one is the question about which I think UN and civil society would be very interested. And that is coming again from Shilpi and Lars or introduction. I'm drawing from that. And that is what agenda we need to support locally co-created research and mutual learning among not just this one, but many communities across Gujarat, across India, across the world around the co-location of hazards. So do we have to wait till one community learns and then it takes whatever time it takes for the state and others to translate, or can the communities learn that more fast and quickly and efficiently, given the technology and other access we have? So I thought these five would be very useful questions for things to take up. I'd like to sum up by, the project hasn't touched, but by addressing, one is this whole preparedness and commons. And is there commons of preparedness, or is it always individual paid for by the market or a donor? And that's something project hasn't addressed, but there is material there. And second is preparedness individual, isolated, solitary, or is it solidarity, organizing, coming together? And that's something it was a very short project and difficult times, as I said. But that's again coming up future. So with those words, I'd like to thank IDS. It's a tremendous pleasure and honor to be here, and to the audience for you to turn up. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Mihir, for those wise reflections, and thanks to all the speakers. So we have now just under half an hour for comments, questions, reflections from the audience, and also for those online. So does anyone want to start? Any questions? Are there any questions online yet? Not yet.
What would be nice is to at least know the names of people who are here.
Yeah.
If that's all right. I'm just so very excited. I don't come here often. I've hardly come, so I would really like to.
When you ask a question, maybe you can just
Exactly.
say your name and your role. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. That's it.
Sorry, can you speak actually? Oh, sorry. So I have a ramble, take from it what you will, but my name's Hannah Macpherson. I'm working with Shibaji on another project towards brown gold with some photo voice. So I suppose the first reflection was around design and when it allows an increase in comprehensibility and when it doesn't. And obviously both things happened. And then there's a question about for whom. Obviously, I'm a geographer, so tradition of kind of mapping as imposition is always a worry. And but clearly this is like an amazing visual as well that I want to go and look at. So I commend that as well. But just a reflection on comprehensibility for who and when, I suppose, is kind of nuanced, isn't it? And then there's something, I think, Shilpi, you spoke about risk. And then and so maybe we need to move away from framing these in terms of risk around and rather think about a lens of radical uncertainty. And then I was just thinking, what was like, again, I'm sure you know this, the nuance is there in your mind, but I'm thinking, oh, whenever anyone's done a risk assessment, it's within the context of radical uncertainty. I don't know if that person will fall down the stairs, or I don't know if this storm will come. And I just wondered whether you were opposing a risk approach, or you were just proposing this lens in addition, or exactly where that's at. Sorry, that's vague.
Thanks very much. Does any of the panelists want to respond to that or to follow up on that?
Yeah,
thank you.
So yeah, I totally agree. I think the idea of mapping as well, we're very aware of that when it can be imposed against the colonial challenges that come with it. So one of the things that we're looking at much more closely now are this idea, as Shilpi pointed out, of kind of knowledge cartographies. So mapping different knowledges, and it kind of links very closely to kind of data visualization kind of studies. So they would be the elements that we're leaning into much more. So with the work that we've done so far, there's two maps in the room. So one of them is kind of geographically based, and that in a sense was just to try to land the project because it is a location based study. But that I think through the conversations this week, that probably isn't a graphic that's going to be published more widely. It's something that kind of works with the internal group for that dialogue. The one on the right in here, so the one with the circles that was in the presentation, I think that is something that lends itself to information design and further communication. So that would be an idea that we work up further. But there's certainly the challenges of for whom and working with the community. I think that was, yeah, that was something that personally I hadn't anticipated, and that did kind of provoke a bit of a rethink and a different approach to it. So most of the content that's coming from this is coming from the research team, and the images themselves have gone through this kind of hybrid production rather than being photo voice as is used in the past. Is now kind of photo elicitation, but based on images taken in response to feedbacks from the community. So yeah, I think they're interesting challenges to embrace as part of the project.
Shilpi, do you want to? Okay.
So I can also add to what Tom has just said, just adding in one example, which I think was very interesting for us. So when Tom gave us the maps to work with, which was in September 2022, we had 5 versions of that map. And I think the first version was the one that you see there, which was the spatial map. And there were quite a few others. And the community couldn't comprehend that space because that is not how they see the village itself. And finally, we worked on a map, which you see in the center of the second chart, that's the one that community mapped in terms of this is what our village looks like. These are the key sites, and that's what's represented in the exhibition at the back. And so there was this tension between comprehensibility and complexity, even at that level, that we see a site in a particular way, but the community relates to those landscapes in different ways, and there are stories around. So the landscape is more about river, bore wells, and that is what that map is mapping. So I just wanted to give this example because that was a lot of methodological thinking has happened in this project while we were in the field. And in terms of this question, the second question around risk and uncertainty, I would say I'm not opposing risk framing. I understand it's an important framing, and not that we shouldn't do risk assessments, but there are limitations now in the context that we are moving into and living in. And so there is a continuum. We can know certain things. For instance, scientists still believe, and I think that it is happening, we can predict heat waves. So the prediction level for heat waves, generally, we know here in the UK, back in India, you know, when the heat wave was approaching, we saw those alarming maps, etc. But Krishna, if he was here, he would say that hydrological forecasting is more messy. It's complicated. So a part of his study was that we started with high precipitation levels, but whether high precipitation levels are leading to floods is still complicated, because floods are induced just not by high precipitation levels, but also land use changes, which Vinita's presentation showed that the canal breached and that led to flooding. So it was riverine flooding and canal flooding. So I think the challenge is that there is a limit to anticipation now, because year after year, month after month, we're seeing different things. So if you prepare, if I was a farmer and I was preparing for heat wave in March 2023, thinking that, okay, last year I saw heat wave, so I must prepare for it. And then you find yourself in the middle of a hailstorm. So I think that is the level of uncertainty. That is, and it's a layered level of uncertainty. It's cascading in different ways, which is what the exhibition and all the visual work has tried to bring out to life.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience or anybody online that wants to get? So, Mihir, did you want to come in on that point? Okay.
What you said and what you asked, and that is that there is a plan. I don't know, it was clear, but Megha and the team is taking this exhibition in a different form to the community back for both purposes. One is to make the full circle, right, Shivaji bhai, as well as validate, and as well as see that if, you know, this is what it is, what would you like to do with this knowledge, this information, this visuals to serve your purpose beyond the actual project. It's going to be in a school on the ground floor in the evening, as we've been slotted the time. And my hunch is, of course, we'll see what actually happens, but quite certainly they would say that let's take this to one of the district authorities and share with them there, either with officers or at the district office permanently, if not for years, at least for a week or so. But we'll see what actually happens. But that's something planned within this and is happening on 26th of this month. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think we have a few questions online. So I'm wondering whether those online are happy to unmute themselves and ask the questions, or we can read it out. It's up to them. Yeah, I can see if I can find it here. Let's see the first one.
Hi, Larzado, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I was asking two questions. I don't mean to take all the time. So happy for panel to respond to either of them. One of them was more about how community members might connect practices of preparing in the past with what they might need to do in the future to respond to radical uncertainty. And then the other was more around the role of lower level bureaucrats, frontline public officials, because the wider statecraft and policies in these contexts can often still reflect a risk management approach. So, if they need to embrace uncertainty, how can they do that when they're sort of confined, if you will, acting within a wider set of policies and structures that are geared towards managing risk?
Thank you. Great questions. So did you get those? Would any of you like to start? Yes, Mega. Do you have the... Just waiting for the microphone. So thank you. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you. So on the question of preparing, how they are preparing in past and in future. So there are two kinds of preparedness we have seen on field. One is short term, one is long term. So majorly the short term is like they are observing some of the patterns of clouds and other patterns of flowering, and they are on the traditional methods of forecasting, and according to that they prepare themselves. Like if they are sowing the black clouds and they are anticipating rain in the evening, they cover their crops or fodder with the plastics. So these kind of short-term preparedness. But on the long-term or future preparedness, I think, as I've said before, agriculture markets and dairy is kind of places that they see as a long-term preparedness. I would like to add one interesting thing is like dairy is one of the key place where during 2017 floods, many of the community member went to the place, and at the terrace, they got the shelter for almost 2 to 3 days. So these kind of places, key sites, they are seeing as a long-term preparedness. And other than that, they are doing seasonal and short-term preparedness.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for those questions. I'll just add on to what Megha said for the first question. I think in terms of short-term preparedness, we're also seeing that there are times or there are periods when they are also caught by surprise. And so that's a challenge, and it's coming up in every season. So when we were there in September 2022, when they lost, I think, 2 rounds of cotton crop because there was continuous rainfall. So how do you prepare for it? Or when we were there in March 2023, when there was hailstorm, it was the time for harvest. And many people did not have storage capacity, for instance. So they left the crop standing and it rotted in the field. So there are these tensions with short-term preparedness because it's about ability to cope, how much can they do? And that is where I think the networks are really playing a big role. We see that role of networks quite visible in the fields, but they didn't jump out when we started. So the visual methods actually helped us unpack that why this dairy is important. And then they started talking about the memories of floods and how floods have helped. And then we went into this whole oral history narrative about, so when did the dairy come about? What are the relationships between these buyers and sellers in the market? And I think these networks, which we are calling networks of reliability in our work, are really playing a key role in terms of preparedness in the face of radical uncertainty. For the next question on lower level officials, of course, yes, I think that's a key challenge, and a challenge that many of us here at IDS, including Lajotto, Laila, who unfortunately couldn't join us, but is also part of the project. We've been working on these issues of uncertainty and how these officials and frontline workers are actually responding to some of them, but are also being challenged by top-down mechanisms. I think there is a tension there, as far as I see in this work and also the work that we've done previously about the fact that there is this top-down risk framing. This is how you need to act. But there's a lot of improvisation and adaptive thinking, or thinking on one's feet, happening at that level. In this particular site, we didn't see a lot of it, to be honest, from the state itself, because at many points, the state wasn't present, because for irrigation officials, it's, for instance, understaffed. So there was a missing link between the state and the village here in this case.
It's not always there for all the sites that we worked in. So that's why the networks are stepping in. That's why these relational capacities are stepping in. But in other contexts, I feel there's a lot of improvisation happening. There's this relationship building because usually the frontline staff is embedded in those networks within the village. So for instance, agricultural extension officer is a key nodal point. In this village, that person was absent, for instance, which was quite a rare thing. So I think these are some of the challenges that we've seen. Yes. Yes. And I think I never met a local Sarpanch, Panchayat leader for past 2 years when I was on field. So no election for Panchayat as well. And also 4 transfers of revenue officials within 2 years of time.
Just quick interventions because we have.
I just want to add to what Megha was saying. This also there is fusion of forecasting and which leads to how to prepare. So they actually Megha has talked about the indigenous traditional methods, but there are IMD data, which IMD stuff that come knowledge, and also there are knowledge of locally based vernacular weather forecasters. So they use all this fuse together. And in terms of, there is a seasonality tracker. I'll just take half a minute. So see, number one is we're talking preparedness, but when the uncertainty happens, so this like hedging their bets in terms of cropping patterns also. If you have seen, when we see, so they don't put the entire land into one cropping pattern, which they would have been doing earlier, but now they hedge it like half here or half there. So that's also one of the issues, solution that came out from them.
Thanks very much for those answers, and thank you, Jeremy, for those questions. I think Laila Mehta online has also added that in Gujarat, there is also not just risk management, but a lot of command and control from the top, especially around water, flood, irrigation management, a lot of outsourcing now, and an absent state too. In a way, still far away from both risk and uncertainty paradigms in this context due to the emphasis on technocratic infrastructure-led command and control paradigms. So I think that adds to the idea of the project to kind of open up those and challenge those current structures and also work with networks on the ground and build up from there. And this is very much sort of also what we tried to do in the Tapestry project, which preceded this one and overlapped a bit. So I think we have one more question online, and if there's anybody in the room, there's 2 questions in the room. Okay, so 2 quick questions in the room after the online question, and then we have to wrap up, I think. So Daval online, are you happy to unmute and ask your questions, or do you want me to read it out? Okay, I can read it out if you're. Yes, okay. I think you're there. So
yeah, hello.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. It's really interesting to see a very multidisciplinary approach while particularly reflecting on co-located hazards. And I just drawing from some of the experiences that I have had in central Maharashtra, the Marathwada region, is also coping with some of these issues where we see floods and droughts, or as you pointed out, green drought. In Maharashtra, the government officially uses the term Ola Dushkar, or the wet drought, which is like excessive rainfall during the monsoon. And there is a compensation to farmers based on the assessments. So the questions that I come to is around the question of scale. It's quite interesting to see, because co-location and the location in it, the word has kind of a connotation of space or a spatial element attached to it. And what we saw in these different presentations was a very interesting take from India, where atmospheric models and maps that we often see are quite regional and quite, so exactly whom they serve, or the comprehensibility of those maps. And then coming to extreme other end of the spectrum, that is a village, And in between them is this whole dam, which is like, again, a regional thing. So it's quite interesting to see. And what I would like to know more is how all of these different disciplinary researchers came together to discuss and understand scale through their work to kind of reflect on, how scale was considered. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so yes, thank you for that question, Dawal. And Tom, do you want to have a quick response? I think we're out of time very soon, but maybe we can go over a few minutes. Yeah.
I can quickly respond in terms of the last part of that comment about how we came together from our different disciplinary perspectives. And I think a lot of it, as has come through in the presentations, was embracing that kind of emergent practices. So we all had initial ideas as initial project plan. We had a quick look at the original objectives of that this morning and realized, the essence of the project is still, very much front and center, but the specific practices that we adopted evolved significantly. So there had to be a real kind of willingness to kind of change our practices quite radically as the project was ongoing. And, as right at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about it's the last meeting of the project, but it's the first time that we've all been together in the room at the same time. And I think that actually, this past 3 or 4 days has been, really illuminating, certainly for me, and I'd imagine this is the case for others. And I think that the pace of the synthesis of this work will really pick up from this point onwards, because I think there is a real challenge in almost like synchronizing with each other in terms of our thinking, trying to adopt common vocabulary, because I think often the ideas that we're talking about have a disciplinary language that creates a false distinction between our different standpoints, where actually, there's a lot of it is more similar than it may seem. But then within that, there are definite differences to our respective insights and interests that I think need to be embraced to kind of maintain a diversity in a project that doesn't get reduced down to a single narrative. I think that kind of monolinear narrative of crisis and complexity becomes really problematic. It kind of undoes a lot of the work that's gone into the project to identify these multiple narratives.
Thanks very much, Tom. So I think we decided to go over a few minutes if people are happy to stay for a few more minutes. I also realized that coffee and cakes aren't here yet, so maybe that will be holding you in the room a bit longer. So we had 2 questions, I think, in the room. So if you could, briefly say your name, if you don't mind, and so that we. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm Devorshi. I'm studying development studies here. So, I mean, almost taking from what Jeremy mentioned about training the lower level bureaucrats and the leaders. So what I found is, I think co-location is a very interesting concept that we can work and further research can be done. But also when we are bringing, at least from the methodological point of view, so many different disciplines and methods, there is also a problem with generalizability, as you mentioned, that this monolinear concept of crisis is really harmful and undoes a lot of work that has been done. But what does this lack of generalizability mean for governance and at the policy level? Because when we are dealing with this very radical uncertainties, and also sort of taking forward from there, I was also wondering if it's really possible to deal with these uncertainties without dealing with some of the structural problems that we see around us, and in terms of economy or the stratification that we see. Because I mean, co-location is also a very interesting concept from the perspective of praxis as well. So I think how do we see, or what can be the possible pathways going forward, or is it a hint that we are getting? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So yes, so let's have the other question as well, and then we can.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation. It was really wonderful. I'm Rishabh. I'm also studying MA development studies. And my question is on the methodology of selecting the sites for the project. Just wanted to understand on what basis the villages were selected. And the second one is about two things which should be mentioned in the conclusion on migration patterns and the change in land use. So is the project also trying to quantify the change in migration and the land use patterns, and what one of you also mentioned about the change in cropping patterns during the monsoons. So just wanted to know that from the last 2 years, is there a quantifiable change in those two indicators?
Thank you for those questions. So I think, yes, I don't know who in the panel would want to talk to those. Maybe Shilpi as a...
Dave's one? No.
Okay. Here and then Shilpi.
No, I think
Right,
your
yeah.
questions related to, at least in my mind with Jeremy, what he had asked and what happens at the local level and how the structures actually. I think a couple of things that we already very lightly and from far saw, and one could build on that. One is just be aware of uncertainty, and that level of awareness itself makes a lot of difference about what kind of decisions lower level officials on the ground do. Second is be tentative about whatever one is doing at a lower level or on the ground when you are command. And that's something which would be helpful. Third is to be adaptive, that you may have a very clear plan about preparedness, but make it adaptive and change the plan as the real situation changes, because the uncertainty will require you to. So make adaptation of the plan very. The fourth is, which is part of the previous one, adaptive, is be flexible, both in terms of funding and budget lines. That you can't really have a very strict funding and budget lines to do that. Then there is a sense of buffer that uncertainty will either cost you more time or more money or more people. So you must have extra people, extra time, extra money from somewhere to draw from the administration, from the system. So some sort of a buffer to draw from. And the last is make things as local as possible, because that will only reduce time and effort to be responsive to uncertainty. Higher you go all the way to National Disaster Management Authority or even higher, then the cost of doing that is going to be far more in terms of people and time and money. So District Disaster Management Authority would be the ideal place to actually bring in this awareness about uncertainty in the assessment of risk that you were saying. Thank you. So that's to your question, but I thought the other one is also interesting if anybody else wanted to answer. Yeah, methodology part.
Thanks, Mihir, and thank you for that question, Debashri and Rishabh. So I would say for the method, so I'll answer the methodology question. In terms of selection of sites, that was an interesting journey, like everything else on all our projects. That so we did select. We've been working before this project, as Lasha to mention, Tapestry and another project which was led by Laila Mehta, Uncertainty Project. So this theme has been a long time in making, and we've been working in this region for a fairly long time. So Anticipate is actually a sister project for all those projects. So we wanted to work in Gujarat. So that's the state selection because of this flood drought paradox, a historically drought-prone area now facing floods. And as Krishna's presentation showed, it's just the opposite in another of the key sites where we worked with Shibaji, especially where Eastern India is now faced with droughts, a wet region turning more drought prone. So I think that paradox was quite critical. In terms of selecting the specific site, I think, so we zeroed on Banaskantha, North Gujarat, because that is where maximum flooding had happened in 2017. So we went by that. And then we selected a site where we just, it's a bit of serendipity as well, because we were just in March of 2022, in the middle of the heat wave, we were driving across North Gujarat and getting a sense of, okay, how do people respond to issues of flood? And then we zeroed on in this village, which is actually on the banks of the river Banas. And it was the flooding in this area which led to massive loss of livelihoods. In our village, there was no loss of life, but loss of livelihoods. And over a period of time, then we had Megha, for instance, she spent almost 2 years in that village, building that rapport with the community, talking to people, and then evincing some of those issues and expressions around uncertainty. So that's one. In terms of quantification, I would say, if I got it right, you were asking us about, are we quantifying changes in land use and migration patterns? No, because it was a finding in itself, because we wanted to understand why were floods happening in this region. Is it just high precipitation levels, as our model shows, or there is other stuff? And there are plenty of things happening. So land use change because of dam building, infrastructure, human-made infrastructure, sand mining, for instance. So we're looking at drivers of flood, for instance, very locally. So we've not quantified it. Migration came out as an adaptive strategy, as a distress migration. So in that map that you see there, there are two patterns of mobility that we've mapped. There's economic migration, and then the other is distress migration. When are people migrating? Who's migrating? And why are they migrating? So that is the way we did it. So it was more informed by the below and then moving upwards to understand some of those issues.
Okay.
And then she asked that, Mihir, can you help me find a village where you can ensure 2 heat waves, 1 flood, and a hailstorm in the middle of
heat wave when we found
middle of 2 heat waves? And I said, sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to close the seminar. Thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you for the audience online and in the room. And for those in the room, please join us afterwards if you can. So thank you all and goodbye.